Yeah.
That's isn't it?
Alrighty.
So, would you happen to have a half sheet of paper that I have?
Yes.
Always so kind.
So that is then. So what is the saliency map? Alrighty. Big so. So first of all, saliency map is just going to be a mapping of the image where we are showing the points in the image that are most affecting the neural network. So if we're doing classification, if there was a picture of a dog and it was trying to classify it as a dog, it might light up, it would be like a heat map and it would light up that area, the portions that it's most focusing on. So, let's get to, oh yeah, I forgot, we're starting with the art show. So, neural networks are scary and Lovecraftian, and therefore all of their artwork they make is scary and Lovecraftian. So, I don't know what this is. I see what looks like some sort of Parisian street down here, and then there's a squirrel, dog, elk thing here.
So is this completely generated by the network, or has nothing to base it on? It just made this on its own, or did it have a base image that it tried to apply some style to?
Yeah, this is made from something called a GAN, a generative adversarial network. We'll talk about that later today, but it's basically taking what it's learned and generating that from noise, and it's some horrific things have happened here, is all I can say. I don't like it, but it happened. Here's some, I think this is mostly from the, we talked the last time about activation maximization. Some of the later layers ended up with just these kind of fusions of animals. Animals are going to be a big theme in their art just because they get trained on them a lot. I think there's a lot of animal pictures in ImageNet and such. But yeah, there's a lot of fused things going on here. We have some more modern stuff. Batman, but he's just eyes, and maybe a dog. Also, there's a lot of dogs. There's also Mona Lisa's a dog, and also like intestinal worms maybe in the background. I don't know. I don't want to know either. It's nothing good here. But anyways, that's what we're going to be looking at today. The different imaging processing tasks we can use with these neural networks that we've been looking at this entire time. We've looked at classification just kind of as a base example, and to learn all of our different techniques. But now we're going to start looking at what we can actually do with these techniques we've been learning. First, though, how's the lab going for everyone? Lab.
So far, after the first one, once you get to the swing of it, you kind of know how to get to the next step, and it's not, super confusing where it's like, okay, I know what I need to do. I just have to go around to learning how do I do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess it'd be a good process to it.
Okay, is everyone, I know we talked before, but is everyone else thinking they'll be able to finish by next week fine, or?
Yeah.
Okay. That should be good. We'll talk after about that, but, yeah, I think that's good then. Next week's big week, we're gonna talk about style transfer. We're gonna release the style transfer lab, and you'll have a lot of time to do that, including over break, but you'll have time afterwards if you don't want to spend your break staring at neural networks. So, we looked at classification, but there are all these different tasks we might want to do with the neural nets. We can do segmentation, generation. Those are very high-level things. We can do very specific subsets of those things. We can get information from our image. Again, we can use these as any sort of function approximator, just like we've been talking about this entire time. But we can do whatever we want, basically, with the image using these. So let's take a look at some. We'll start with classification. We've seen this already a billion times. We're taking our class label Y and we're taking our data record X and trying to establish what the class label Y is based on a bunch of training examples. It's a major area and it can be used for a lot of things because it's very easy to restate a problem as classification. Even if you're going as far as like information extraction, you can just say, does this image contain blank? And then the neural network can try to figure that out and classify it that way. And what you'll see here is the real limit on what you can do a lot of the time is just based on how much data you have to work with, if you have that training data in the right formats and everything. And frankly, when we're talking about image processing, image classification, it's going to be some sort of ConvNet. There hasn't been anything that's been able to get close that isn't a ConvNet, so yeah, big area, but we've been looking at it the entire time. The different types, of course, deterministic, probabilistic. The meshes of those two, we can have multiple classes, we can just have binary classes. Probabilistic with binary is fun because you can just figure out one and then just the others, one minus the other one. Yeah. Yep. We have all these different types of classification, and in fact, that's something I'm working on right now for my data mining project. Is this Kaggle competition. I'm making a neural net that's going to tell me whether a picture of a puppy is cute or not. It's going to tell me how ugly the puppy is and if that's going to affect it getting adopted. And I'm focusing on this part of the screen right now. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm not getting my hopes up, but we're going for it.
Well, all you need is a guess of them saying, yes, the puppy is cute.
I mean, I wish, but sadly
Yeah.
they don't. Yeah, I wish, man. That'd be great.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, from the data set, I think they all got adopted. It's just some of them took a long time to get adopted. So, all right. So, on from classification, we're going to take baby steps outside of that field to classification and localization. Let's say we have an image and we want to classify it, but we also want to say where in the image it is, because there could be a lot of background information. So we want the neural net to draw a nice little red box over the part of the image we're talking about. And obviously we don't need the neural network to specifically draw the box, we just need it to give the location. We can also abstract a little further, say multiple classes within an image. Now we have object detection. And usually we'll pair that with some sort of localization just so we can see, all right, what else is in there. Though if you're doing captioning or something, maybe you don't even need that. Maybe you just need it to say the different things that are in the image. Or instant segmentation, where we're getting a much closer bound to where everything is, where we have certain segments that we're going to place around the parts of the image to try to say exactly where in the image something is. And lots of ways to do that. We'll start with classification. We've looked at that already, just using the neural network to say, is something in the class, or what class is in, or whatever. And localization, we can do this with just 4 more outputs, right? As long as we have the data set already in a position where it's saying the optimal box around this animal, or car, or whatever class we're working with, is at X, Y, with width and height given. As long as we have that in the training data set, the neural network can still copy it. So we just have that as 4 more outputs, and we use them as such, and hopefully it'll work. That strategy does work pretty well, especially with CNNs, because they'll figure that stuff out. They're pretty good. Of course, you could use a different format. You could just use 2 points to define a box, but it just depends how your training data is set up, or how you set it up, because you can usually pre-process it however you want, and how you want to end up having the neural network do it. But as long as you give it those outputs and you have the data for it, it'll figure it out. You are also going to need a loss function of some sort, though, and when we're talking about things like object detection or the localization. This is a pretty good one for that. Area of overlap over area of union, kind of visually shown here. It's basically trying to minimize how much of, you want to get the minimal box without it leaving the size of the training box, or the training one either. You want, so optimally it would just be the training one, which is exactly what we want a loss function to do, is see how close we are to the optimal solution. Alright, so, yep. Yeah, we're just going to be putting some fully connected layers at the end to handle that, and to make sure that the there. Yeah, we have to make sure that the parts of the parts that are calculating the different parts of the box, the different dimensions of the box, we usually want to keep that separate from the part of the network that's calculating the class, because that's going to be independent data and we know it, and having the interplay between each other is just going to be a lot more for a neural network to deal with. But we can definitely and should definitely share the convolutional layers. So basically what you have there is convolutional layers all the way down, and then when we get to the end with fully connected layers, you have two little subsections of the network that splits off to one fully connected layer that's handling the class like we had before, and one set of fully connected layers handling the dimensions of the box. Object detection and segmentation are a bit more complicated. I think they usually involve some sort of either going through the image several times or RNNs, but won't be looking at them too much. They are using a lot of the same ideas though. We're just adding more data for the network to work with. More outputs, more inputs and such. Human pose estimation. This one's kind of fun. I think there was a recent article about this. I think there was recently a network that was able to do this better than any in the past, which is pretty cool. But basically, given an image, we want and a certain number of segments, we want a network to tell us what shape the human body is in at that time. And you can do that in a 2D way like this does. The network I was looking at from the article was, I think they were getting it to work in a 3D way, which is pretty cool. But yeah, you're allowed K segments and you want to represent the pose as a segment skeleton. So, again, it's basically we're just adding more inputs and outputs to use. We're saying we want to define the body's key points, maybe the shoulders or the knees or whatever is going to work. And each point we're going to try to assign a coordinate, and that's going to be our training data. And then the network is just going to have to learn where those points are and can then create the segments as such. Again, this is one way of doing it. Pretty much all the stuff today we're going to be looking at is stuff that is somewhat open research. There isn't a perfect solution for it yet, but this is one way to look at it, one simple way of trying it. Depth estimation. This one's fun, and actually the research I started working with that got me to doing this class. So basically, given a 2D image, can we estimate the depth in that image? Can we extrapolate into some sort of 3D representation? And yes, we can. In fact, it's easier with two images, of course, binocular vision, but it's been done. So I believe this is with just one image each. And what they're doing here is just throwing it through a ConvNet, basically, and having it try to figure out the depth based on the training examples, which are learned from usually some sort of laser scanner, a LiDAR or whatever, some sort of 3D scanner. So the scanner was able to figure out this column. That is the actual heat map we're looking at that's telling the depth of the image. And as you can see, the neural network is pretty close. It's not perfect in a lot of ways. It's much fuzzier in figuring out exactly where things are. And you can see it's just kind of forgotten about the pillow going on in this chair. Not that the ground truth is actually that much better, so. And it thinks that it seems to overestimate things as being farther away too. Like you can see back here we have the bookshelf in the back there isn't all that far away. The ground truth is labeling it as yellow. The neural network thinks it's very far away because it's full of red, but besides that, it's not bad. So again, this one's not fully solved, but what they're doing here is just having, this is a fully convolutional network. This isn't going to have fully connected layers at the end. There are layers, in fact, I think there might be some in the middle though. Did I put it on there? Yes, they are. So we have a lot of convolutional layers, just like we have for any other ConvNet. It's downsampling and learning as it goes. But once it gets to the middle, it becomes a fully connected layer for a while. And then it goes the other way. It does something called up-convolutions, which are just a similar version of a normal convolution. It's just making the image bigger as it goes. And it does that to extrapolate that depth map from there. You can think about it as the first part is learning the image, and the second part is learning the depth map from the inputs that the first part gave it. Yeah, up convolutions, and they're just they're not the inverse of convolutions, but they're convolutions that are moving upward, making bigger and bigger outputs instead of smaller and smaller ones. All right, image generation. This one's fun. Given training images, we just give it a bunch of images. Can we have it generate similar images? Yes, we can. And they're all horrifying. Everyone is still horrifying. This one is like infinite apple stands. Just going back, like fractal apples. I don't like it. We have this one's actually okay. This is one of the few okay ones because it's got this temple going on.
That's a desktop background.
Is it?
That could be.
It would be a good one.
I'd download that.
Yeah, it's not bad. I think there's a bowling alley here too if you look. Yeah, I just noticed that. I guess this is kind of reminding me of Big Lebowski a little bit. Between equating, could that be a metaphor, equating bowling to his temple? I don't know. It's pretty great though. We have that one, of course. It's still Lovecraftian and monstrous. Oh, I just noticed there's like a pufferfish dog thing here. The more you look at this thing, like there's a duck fish. It's too much here. Here's a tarantula fused with a gorilla. I don't know why, but it decided to do that, or someone told it to do that, or something. But that's what GANs do sometimes. That looks kind of snake-like, but I don't know. Space shuttle in a church. That one's actually kind of okay too, just because there's not all the animal ones are bad. All the animal ones are disturbing. But that one's kind of neat. This one's not Lovecraftian at all. I mean, there's like some eyeballs floating through space. But it's really cool. And the reason that it's not scary is because I lied. This is not made by a neural net. This one's made by a genetic algorithm. But I still wanted to show it because genetic algorithms are cool. And they can do this, and that's awesome. Back to neural nets. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, everything's an animal. This whole tower's an animal with legs, and there's some people that have two big heads and are attached to cars, and
oh.
These cars are really small.
yeah, and this is just a weirdly well-formed duck thing going on up here. Yeah. Is the dress white and gold or black and blue or literally a dog? This one I think is actually style transfer, but nonetheless interesting. Hopefully your style transfers won't look like that because that's the worst thing. This one's kind of cool. This one's got like telephone boxes and fountains and stuff. Still a little scary though. Still a little. Oh, it looks like it has the same bowling alley too. This thing is Google Dream really likes that bowling alley. But yeah, they're all terrifying. But we're gonna learn how to make them anyways. So this is a bit of a complicated system called a generative adversarial network. These things are really cool, and they were, I think, first invented in 2014, which was my freshman year of college, so they're very new. We will be discussing them in their own, I think we're having like a half lecture for Dan's basically later, but we're going to talk a little bit about them now. So the basic idea, we might have a network where, let me make sure I'm in the right place. Okay, I'll start there, one step at a time. So we can generate just some random image pretty easily, right? That's not that hard. We can have the neural network output a tensor, the shape of an image, and then we're done. The problem is we need to be able to make it look somewhat human. And we could make it directly copy training data, but that doesn't tend to work very well because it'll usually just start reproducing the training data with just certain bits different and stuff. So really what we want to have is something that takes in random noise and using that outputs an image that is still very similar to an image we put into it. It has a lot of the same features. So what we want to do is have both a network to handle the generation and a network to handle, to decide whether whatever it generated was good or not, and to help basically act as a scoring function or a loss function for that original network. So we start where we create one CNN that's going to be our discriminator. That is going to be a classifier, just like we've done before, and it is going to tell real images from generated images. Sometimes we're going to feed it an image that's actually a human image that was made, and sometimes we're going to feed it a image from a generator. The other one, of course, is the generator, completely separate CNN that is going to be trained separately but during the same process as the discriminator. And its job is just to generate images that the discriminator labels as true. It's trying to trick the discriminator. So as you can see what's happening here, we input noise. This creates an image, which of course at the start are just going to be fuzz, basically. And the discriminator has to tell whether it is a real image or not. It's going to be trained on the real image and then the fake image over and over again, not always one-to-one. And in fact, the thing is, one of the hardest things here is the discriminator is going to learn much faster than the generator. As we know, the CNNs are very good at classification. The generator, it's harder to do that. It's harder to go about that. So you'll have to train the discriminator more times than you'll be training the generator. Another little pro tip for these, don't try to train them both during the same cycle. hold the gradients here, don't adjust anything here while you're training this one, and vice versa. But slowly, eventually, you'll get to the point where the generator should be able to trick the discriminator a lot of the time. And once you get to that point, the optimal point with these is that the discriminator is just about as good at detecting as a human, and the generator is just a little better than that. But yeah, really useful, interesting little algorithm. Yeah, there's a more detailed kind of look at it where you see it's also using these up convolutions a lot of the time. But we're getting in, our training data is both going to be from the actual training set and the generator training set, and the discriminator just has to classify whether it's real or fake. So yeah, as I said before, you gotta make sure the discriminator doesn't learn that much quicker than the generator, and you're going to have to also make sure the opposite doesn't happen, because if you inhibit the discriminator too much, the generator might actually just get better and it'll just have no chance to catch up. You have to very much supervise that the competition stays about equal until it gets to the later points, and then it'll take off, hopefully. Oh yeah, it's made in 2014, and here's the link for it. And you know, I post the lectures, so if you want to learn more about those, especially if you want to do that for a final project kind of thing, that is a great start for looking at GANs, and they have QRS code, which is always helpful. Yeah, there's a lot of research to do with those. They are very new. So let's talk about caption generation. We have an image, we want to create a caption that is explaining what's going on in that image. So again, lots and lots of ways to do this, very open field of research, but one basic idea is to have an encoder-decoder model. The encoder is going to be a CNN, just like we've been using this whole time, and that's going to take in the images, and it's going to be in charge of understanding the image and what's going on in the image. But then we need something to decode that into language. This is kind of mimicking the human brain in a lot of ways, how it works, where we're taking in the image and having that processed as its own thoughts, and then that goes to the language center, which has to do things to make it work with the language you're using. So in this case, we're going to use an RNN for that. RNNs are pretty good at understanding the structure of human language. Sometimes they get pretty wonky. I think I've mentioned before about the RNN that made Christmas carols, and they were all really, really weird. But it gets the structure pretty well most of the time. So the CNN is going to feed its information into the RNN, and the RNN can then output a series of words describing the image, and hopefully it works pretty well. I don't think we are great at that yet as a field, but we're getting there. And again, another link if you want to look at that. I think there's code on that one too. But so last little topic for today. It's not really a task in itself, but it's important to look at. And remember we talked about the activation maximization last time? We talked about how you can see the internal layers of the network by learning from them and getting where we have these very simple shapes at the bottom. We get higher level shapes as we go up until we have full objects kind of understood. It hierarchically builds understanding of the image. So there's a way to output these images, and you can almost think of each of these images as, for that neuron, that is the image that best, that is its like Platonic essence kind of thing. Like, anyone ever study philosophy, essentialism? Yeah, so I won't geek out about essentialism just today. That's why we have the neural network philosophy lecture in several weeks. But basically, each of these different images are going to be for that neuron, that's what it learned. That is its understanding of the world. And basically, we can get that image. We can still get that image so we can see it and use it. How do we do that? Well, we've done backpropagation before where we are fixing the input. We say the input isn't changing, but the weights are changing. Well, the simple way to do this is to put in a zero image. The entire image is zeroed out, and we instead fix the weights. We say the weights aren't going to move. We want to find the gradients of the input. This is the partial derivative of the loss with respect to the input. So when we do that, we can adjust the image instead of the actual, instead of the weights, and that can produce our activation map. Keras has a function for that if you want to mess with it. It's called visualize activation. We also talked about the saliency maps, where it'll say exactly where the image is focusing. That's a very similar process, and you can do that with visualize saliency. But yeah, basically you can see the architecture, the internal hierarchical representation of the images using this process. Here's kind of a look. It's hard to see because they couldn't get it much.
So what do you put the zeros in the input or the output?
Input.
In the input, okay.
Yeah, the output from each different layer and each different neuron is going to be what?
Okay, and then this is going to be forward propagation, and then after that you do the backward propagation, compute the gradients.
Yes, but the gradients are not going to be the gradients for the weights. It's going to be the gradients for the image, for the input. It's the same process we did with backpropagation, except we are, instead of doing it with respect to the weights, we're doing it with respect to the input.
Okay.
So as you can see here, we have, this is from VGG 19, which we will be using quite a bit for style transfer. And you can see we have these earlier layers here, Conv1, where we have just these really basic shapes being drawn, lines, colors, and that's very much understanding the basic parts of the image. And we get over here, we start to get some textures and some patterns, just get some dots, you get some waves kind of going around, and eventually we get to these more complex patterns, these more interesting shapes, and it keeps going further and further down until we're actually understanding objects. Now, one thing to think about before next lecture is if we were doing some sort of style transfer, we talked basically about that before, but if we want to get the style of an image, where is that style going to reside within the network versus the content versus the larger objects? The larger objects are going to be down here. They're going to be at the ends. Style, it's not going to be at the end. We'll start with that. I think that's it for today. A lot of links, all the different papers here. Actually, I don't think there's too many papers, but most of them are tutorials that you can look at if you want to get into some of these applications. Could be useful for final projects. I think some of the possible final projects I have are going to be to do with this sort of thing, but we'll talk about more when that time comes. And I think we're good there. Next week we talk about style transfer and start that. And that's good.